is mental health difficult for the church to maybe process in its organizational structure, I guess, if that's what we want to say, or is there a place for the church to be able to lean into mental health and be an actual safe space or actual agency for mental health?
I think it should be that way. But realistically, money and budgets and things like that, I don't know how likely it is to have like a clinician or someone like on staff. But I think that it would be helpful because yes, we can pray about it. Yes, we can, all have community and talk about it. But, at the end of the day, if someone is suicidal or something, they need more help than that. All of that intertwined can, be very helpful, but kind of to one of you said, we have to be able to address it like with a specialized person who went to school for it because it is a science. So I think that if there was a world where there could be a therapist working just to help with that it would be helpful, because a lot of people don't feel comfortable going to therapists for the stigma, and we just have to cut that out. We have to get rid of the stigma that mental health and therapy is for white people. It's for everyone. We all need someone to talk to because we're all dealing with people. We're all dealing with things that happen, and so we have to be able to process that and get tools so that we're not stuck there.
And so, Jennifer, with what Jasmine just said, what can the church do as far as support? So what are some things that the church can do from a supportive standpoint or perspective to help those that they see that are suffering?
I think one of her suggestions is really good, and there are certain churches that do have a counselor or a therapist that is on campus, on staff, probably not as readily available as we like it to be. Just the fact that we're doing this panel shows you that there are professionals in the church who are available to maybe provide some kind of services, like some groups, or coming to do like some kind of talk or something like that to address issues. I think every church should have some kind of ministry that has resources available to the people that are attending, so that if they are going through something, maybe you can't provide that service in the church in these four walls, but you have a list or somewhere to direct them so that they could go get help through Medi-Cal or whatever it might be. Some people don't have Medi-Cal. There are people who provide a sliding scale, which would be based on their income. Victims of crime. There is a lot of violence and crime, so if you've been a victim of a crime, it is free to get those services. I believe it's 40 sessions, and the therapist can request more if it's needed. So there are resources, and I think the resources definitely have to be available if we can't do something specifically in the church with the people that are there.
Okay, and so this is two questions that came, two of the same questions from two different people from the audience, and so I know that the Holy Spirit is working. So how do you, whether you have someone in your family or you have someone in your church family, Chantel, that you see that they are, you suspect they're suffering from mental illness, but then they're not receptive to receiving help, what can you advise for folks to do? What are some best practices even to help them get their folks or us as the church to get people to go seek the help that they need?
It is really hard when you have someone that doesn't themselves see that there's a problem or there's a need. And so providing that spiritual and emotional support, that social support for that person without offering advice. Asking them, how do they see themselves? How do they see their world right now? How is their family functioning? How are things at work? Oh, those are some things you might need to work on. Those are some things you might need some help. Let's look at what some of those options could be. So being available to provide linkage to them without saying, you know what, girl, this is what you need to do. Because that's hard to hear, that's hard to receive. It doesn't matter if you get them into the therapist's office, if they don't believe they need to be there. Their goal, their mission, their purpose has to come from within. It has to come from self. We see our kids sometimes acting out and they're like, why can't they just follow my vision? Because they don't see it for themselves, and you're gonna struggle until you guys get on the same page, right? And if they're constantly feeling like they're coming into a place of shame, of blame, of you should have done this and you should have done that, then that further isolates them and further causes them to withdraw, that they're not gonna know, they're not gonna recognize who you can be for them, right? And then also when you finally have a place in their ear, you have a place in their heart where they might be open to hearing some of your recommendations, don't save them. That's not our job. We're here to help with the healing process, but God is the ultimate savior, right? And if we continue to try to rescue them and prevent them from hitting their bottom, where do they have the opportunity to seek God for who He is, right? And so when we're looking at resources and opportunities for them to get help, it has to be from their own volition, and that's where you're gonna get their buy-in. We just have to stand by, be available for crisis response. If they're suicidal, you're not gonna just let them hang themselves, right? We have to have the courage to step up and get other authority agencies involved, whether that be the police, the pet team, have that person hospitalized, have conservatorship over them. It's hard, it's hurtful to feel like you're taking someone's power and their autonomy. But there are situations where as grandma has to let go and say, baby, I'm giving you to God, and God put other agencies in place. We're being good stewards over the resources He's given us. If you need a lawyer, you're gonna have that lawyer represent you in court. If you need a doctor, a surgeon, you're gonna have that surgeon provide that operation that you need. If you need to be in the hospital so you can stabilize, be safe, maybe get on some medication and then get linked to therapy, then that's what we need to be able to have the courage to do, to let go and to connect them and not take on that burden, that responsibility for ourselves. I can go in the classroom, I'm not a very good teacher, but I can provide a really good therapy service if you need it.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So if we with especially when it comes to family, you know, when you're looking at family, you say that we shouldn't push, that we should have buy-in. Jennifer, how do we get buy-in? How do we get them to the point to where they will buy?
Of course, we know from AA meetings and things of that sort that if they don't have buy-in, then they're not going to complete. So how do we get them to the point to where it's our idea that they buy into it like it's their idea?
When I think of that, the first thing I think of is relationship. I mean, isn't that how we buy into the gospel? We have to have our own personal relationship with our Savior, with the Lord. And so it can't be I know this person is struggling, I'm gonna check on them here and there. You have to, like she said, you do wanna walk alongside them and build a relationship with them, because I don't think there's really any other way to get by. And it's like she said, we have kids who, they don't know why they're in therapy, but we can't affect change if they don't know why they're there and they don't understand the purpose of sitting with a therapist every week. We need them to know, what is your goal? What do you want to get out of this? And it's called the therapeutic relationship because you have to build that. It doesn't just come, you can't, maybe there's a stranger who can speak to you and, you see the light, but in general, humans, we need to be in a relationship in order to trust someone enough to let down our wall and accept help. So I think buy-in comes with relationship, and that comes with time. Obviously, if it's an emergency, you're not gonna wait to get a relationship with that person. suicidal or whatever. But in general, yes, I think you need buy-in by building a relationship with that person.
Okay, so when we deal with buy-in, and we're gonna go across the street. So we dealt with buy-in, we dealt with mental illness and the umbrella. That's what is under the umbrella of mental illness. When we talk about, because this is something that even sometimes we see as parents or guardians or aunts and uncles, grandparents even, when we deal with youth, and we were talking about, Chantel brought up the fact that the brain development is different for a youth than it is for an adult. And so Jasmine, if I have a young person who sleeps too much, does that mean that them sleeping too much is a sign of depression? Or is it just that they are tired because they have so much work to do in the world today? How do you differentiate the two?
I mean, you can't really say that because someone is sleeping too much that they are depressed, but that can be an indicator. Hypersomnia and not sleeping enough, those are all like concerning. If there are other symptoms and behaviors that make you think, oh, maybe something else is going on, then of course pay attention to that and, seek help. If you think that there's something going on and maybe your child or whoever doesn't feel comfortable talking to you about it, or tells you, oh, I'm fine, life is fine, if there is a concern, you'll always be in a better place to go and get help, and they don't need help than it is to not see the signs and they do something to hurt themselves. So I think that if there are like multiple days where they're like sleeping so much, they're not going to school, they're not hanging out with their friends, they're not, doing anything, maybe not eating a lot, eating too much, then those are some concerning behaviors. And so I would suggest to go and seek help.
And how do we see, and I know there's a term that we use, especially for our veterans, post-traumatic stress syndrome. How do we see PTSD show itself as far as our youth are concerned?
Certified trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, so she would be the expert. Have fun on that.
So Chantel, since you are the expert, because these two, they said that you kind of the voice on that. How do we deal with that?
Well, how do you recognize it?
How do you recognize it, especially when you're talking about our youth that sometimes even live in, this term I usually usually urban context where we live more in a compressed community. How do we see that in our youth?
So first of all, with any diagnosis that you're gonna get, you can have sleeping too much, you can have sleep, appetite disruption, all kinds of things that are just little situations, right? But it's how does that behavior impair your functioning? How does it prevent you from having relationships or going to work every day or performing well at school? So it's not just one or two things that are a little quirky, it's how do they affect your ability to just function on a normal level every day? And so when we're looking at PTSD, especially with our youth, we're looking at increased irritability, which might manifest in anger, which might manifest in isolation and withdrawal. It's too difficult to pretend to be okay in front of my parents, so I'm just gonna stay away from them. We have nightmares or night terrors. We've got sleep disruption that comes about because their brain just can't stop. They don't have peace, they cannot rest. So more often than not, we have insomnia when we're dealing with PTSD or other anxiety disorders rather than sleeping too much. Intrusive memories and flashbacks. So when they keep bringing up things from that event that happened 6 months ago, we sit here at Red Lobster, watching the Lakers play, and here you're talking about when grandma got shot. At what point are you going to be able to let that go? Well, obviously that is a pervasive thought, especially if they're bringing it up in conversation. Where did that come from? So when the thought or the statement or the behavior doesn't match what else was going on in that moment, you're like, that's a little bit concerning. And so we have some folks that it looks like they're being cautious and safe in the community. You know, that's the Crip territory. My family are Bloods. I'm not going over there. But you see it when it's like over exaggerated. You know, everybody's going, it's 12 of us going to grandma's house, we do this every Sunday, but there's this increased paranoia or sense of fear, or you cannot relax in the community. What seems to be normal in some situations are really a little more extreme in others, especially with our youth. And I want to say, be mindful of how an adolescent brain is forming. They got this grown-up looking body. They got a mouth that make you want to treat them like they grown, right? But those adolescent years, they don't have the wisdom and they don't have the brain connections that the adult brain does, that a 22-year-old or a 25-year-old may have. They go back to what's called the primitive brain. So if you think your 12 or 13-year-old is acting like your 2-year-old, well, that's where their brain has resorted to, because there's nowhere else to go. It hasn't yet made the connections for them to be 16. And so you gotta wait a little bit longer. So when they're tantruming and acting out, that's all their brain has the capacity to do. That's why parenting is important. Appropriate supervision is important. Checking in and having conversations saying, girl, you tripping. Mommy sees you doing X, Y, and Z, and you have to model for them, because they're not gonna automatically have the judgment that we're assuming they have because they look grown. A lot of things that our kids are experiencing is not because they just came up with it on their own, it's stress that the adults have placed in their lives that they don't have the capacity to understand or to manage. And so if you and your baby daddy are fighting and yelling and drinking and cursing each other out, you want this kid to not have any of those behaviors or a reaction? And so we're saying, oh, he tripping, he got anger management issues. No, he's learning. And it doesn't necessarily mean mental illness, but it could definitely lead to a circumstance where they might need some therapy.
Okay, I like that, because you went into the next question from the audience and you didn't even know that you were going into the next question. So when we deal with that, you're talking about youth that are learning from what they see. So when we deal with that and we expand that out to a greater whole, Jennifer, as a people, we have sustained vicarious trauma, from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration. There was no professional services for my grandmother and my great-grandfather and my great-great-grandfather. And so that's trickled down. So to help us heal, what can we do as a people, as a community, to address that, especially coming from where Chantel just talked about, to where we've learned and we've got this historical stepping out that we're doing. How do we deal with that?
Okay, that was a long question. Okay, I'm just processing the question. Okay, so going back to what Chantel was talking about, and then also thinking about my current position, our program is called FSP Child, but a lot of times we say we don't have FSP clients, we have FSP parents, because it generally starts higher up. It's the kid's the identified patient, that's the person who's getting the services, but it's a community issue. We can't just say it's the kid, it's the whole family system and the community around them, the other people and connections that they have, the supports that they have or don't have. And a lot of times it's the supports that they don't have. So I think in order to address those things, we have to start providing the support for the families, not just the kid. The kid can't just sit in the room with the therapist and process things. We have to hold the hands of the whole family. And we have to figure out what natural supports they have, because at the end of the day, that kid is not gonna have a therapist every week for the rest of their lives. Most likely not. None of us probably will. But what supports can they connect to that they can have throughout their lives? It's not gonna be us, it's gonna be the church. So where do we step in there? Their biological family, their extended family, and how are all of those people also being able to get the help that they need? So we have to normalize it in our community, in our circle, in order for people to be able to talk about it and for the help that is out there to be received and actually taken into account.
Okay, so is there a difference from what you all have seen, is there a difference between mental health that men suffer from and mental health that women suffer from? And why is there not enough men in the mental health field?
So you're asking the types of mental illness that men suffer different
Right.
than women.
Is there a difference between mental health that men suffer and women suffer? And that can be yes or no, or it could be
Yes,
it's the same.
there is only in regards to the types of exposures that we have, because a lot of mental health is based upon environmental stress or circumstances that has created us to respond differently. And so we typically see there are more men that are in the military than there are women. It's not to say that women shouldn't be there, it's just to say that the numbers speak for themselves. And so when you're looking at complex trauma or PTSD, you're gonna have a prevalence in the male population simply because they're exposed to more of those types of traumas than women are. But it's not to discount domestic violence, being sexually exploited. Like there's enough trauma going on for all of us that we all have enough opportunity to have mental illness. But at any rate, it differs. And just in regards to what you're exposed to. Also, I think that equally we have the same opportunity to be functionally impaired, but how do we access it? And so when we're talking about families, right, being exposed to services, that usually comes because the school sees these kids all the time. Children spend most of their waking hours with mandated reporters, with professionals that are trained to recognize if something is not okay. And so these kids are gonna be the identified patient, even though we know it may be trickling down from what mom's going through. So women, I think, have an opportunity a lot more often nowadays to be identified as needing therapy or needing some type of other support, because there's not a lot of two-parent families. And so when you're looking at a wounded male and a wounded mom, who has the most exposure? Who has the most access to help? Well, if there's an absentee dad, how are they gonna be seen for somebody to reach out and to connect with them? And so a lot of times when these moms now get in situations where their kids might be taken from them, now is DCFS involved, and you ain't got no choice but to participate in therapy. And sometimes we're looking for the dads, and we can later engage the dads if we're able to connect with them and they want a relationship with the kids. So it's not the fact that there's not the support and services, it's how are they being identified and how can we access them. Therapy is not cheap. Medi-Cal is not for everybody. Everybody doesn't qualify for full scope Medi-Cal where you can get vision, dental, medical, and mental health services, you know? And so when we often see that the kids that are with their moms having access to greater financial resources, that dad may recognize, yeah, I need help, but he might not be able to afford to get that help. So they're there, it's just access and exposure, I think, that plays the biggest hindrance on services being recognized and provided across the spectrum.
Okay, and so what do you see, and this will be a question for all three of you all to answer, but because Chantel just finished, we'll start with you. What is your thought, or what is your reasoning, or what is the data even for why there is a shortage of males in the mental health field?
We may have fewer practicing clinicians, like primary therapists that are male, but we might have a greater number of males that are the psychiatrists. You know, so they might put in a little bit more effort to raise the bar. They don't necessarily want to stay doing the groundwork, the nurturing, the building, because their personality might suggest that they have a skill in a different area. Also, it takes a lot of schooling and a lot of money to be a part of the mental health field. So I think sometimes there are, for men that have families or have different aspirations, it's a quicker, cheaper route to make quick, good, big money in other areas. But it doesn't mean that those folks don't donate, don't support mental health organizations or whatnot. Sometimes they just choose to take a different career path. I see men more in business or the business element of mental health than actually practicing.
Jasmine?
very good question because you brought up, that there are a lot of kids that grow up without both of their parents. And I think that a lot of kids could use a male, person that provides unconditional positive regard to them. And I've been in a couple agencies, and I just really have not seen a lot of men therapists, case managers. Like, I've really only seen them in like supervisory or psychiatry roles. And I wish I had like a better reason for it, because I definitely think that there is a need. And I think that if there were more male therapists, that maybe more males would go and feel comfortable getting therapy. So I don't know why, but it's something that needs to change in order for like the whole community to be able to process their traumas and move forward accordingly.
I think it's a really layered issue. When I think about the lack of men in the field, I think about the stigma around mental health and the way that our boys are often raised differently from our girls, and the expectations of who they should be and how they show their emotion and how they manage who they are. So if I think of a therapist, I think of someone who's going to be nurturing, who's a good listener, and I think, oh, a woman. And I think a lot of people probably do. You think that a therapist is a healer, a nurturer, and I don't know if in our society we support the idea that men are also nurturing and caring. And I know that because my last child is a son, and he's much different from my girls, and the way that I connect with him is much different. But we've been around people, and he'll pick up, one of his sister's dolls, and they're like, "Oh, you're not worried he's gonna be gay?" No, because his dad, who's with us, also nurtures our kids. So I expect him to pick up a doll and show that connection and that love that he's seeing us model, not just me, but his dad also. So I think it starts really young, just the difference in the way we raise our men, our girls and our boys, and how that follows them throughout their lives, and how they're able to manage their emotion and help other people manage their emotions. So that would be my guess on how that kind of has a domino effect, and the reason why we don't have as many men on the front line doing the therapy role.
Last couple of questions. We'll go down the street a little bit on this one. A lot of people feel that mental health facilities' answer to controlling the illness that we've discussed is heavily medicating the patient. So, Jasmine, what do you say to those people?
Unfortunately, there are some psychiatrists that do kind of overly medicate kids to the point that you're just like, oh, are you there? Like, are you awake? But luckily, I've been a part of agencies that have really good psychiatrists that really take the time to get to know the kids, see what's going on, and see, what medication routine would help them, and, not give them all these side effects or have them zoned out. And so that's what's important, because sometimes, medication support is necessary. Sometimes, we can go to therapy and we can, do the work, but sometimes we just need that little bit of help. And so whenever you do go to a psychiatrist that is, more conservative with, providing and passing out medications, then you'll hopefully get a better result, opposed to having someone that just gets you in, what do you want, Xanax? Okay, because not everybody needs that, and it's important to have a psychiatrist that knows the different side effects, knows what can react and not react with each other. It's just really important in terms of being able to actually have a medication routine that supports your lifestyle.
So, Jennifer, is medication always the answer, or are there other things you can do besides?
Medication is not the absolute answer at all, I would say. And I say that because a lot of times we have parents that come in and they think that the pill is gonna do the work, and that getting their kid into the room with the therapist every week is not gonna do the work. They want something that's gonna make him stop moving. But the reality is that a little boy is gonna be active, and there's a lack of education on the parents' parts about how their child should be acting at any developmental stage. And we want our kids to just be zombies sometimes, to be in control of them or whatever the case is. I think there's lots of layers to that as well. But I wouldn't say medication is always the answer. I think it could be part of the answer, but it is not the complete answer for anyone. And I mean, that's just like if you have the flu, they could give you something, but you also have to rest. You also have to watch what you're taking into your body in terms of your diet. You know, you're not gonna be out and about going to a party. Like, you have to take care of other parts of yourself. It's not just the medication that is addressing the illness, it's a whole bunch of other things as well.
Chantel?
It's all about partnership and relationships that we've been discussing the whole time. So when you take your child or your family member or yourself to the psychiatrist is supposed to be in partnership with your doctor, your primary care physician. And so, I don't know if anyone's ever had high blood pressure medication or some medication where the first dosage just didn't quite work, but you talked to the doctor about it and you switched it up and you're like, oh, okay, that's better. It's not gonna be the perfect, correct answer necessarily right out the gate. It might take some trial and error. So there's partnership with your psychiatrist and with your primary care physician. Most of the time, folks aren't taking psychotropic medication and not in therapy. There's usually a partnership with your psychiatric support and your weekly clinical support, your therapist, and they should be communicating with one another. Why is therapy so critical? It's not just about talking, it's about doing. So am I doing and practicing and rehearsing the things that I've learned in therapy while I'm taking my medication, so I can report back the progress or lack thereof with my therapist, with my psychiatrist, who's also gonna report back to my doctor. So you're not in this alone. There's a whole lot of facets involved with total care. And so if it doesn't work the first time, try it again if we think that it's necessary, because remember, the only time you're gonna give medication is if it's been identified as an imbalance, a chemical imbalance. Medication is there to bring you to a stable place, which means you started off this way. But if you started off this way and things just aren't going well, medication more than likely is not gonna be part of your treatment plan.
Amen. So as we bring this thing full circle, we'll end the last two questions, and they'll be easy. Deal with the church. So the one of the last questions is, how does the church, because I know that this is something that I want us to lean into. Lady Karen and myself want to lean into mental health and making it part of the ministry. So something you all said earlier was being sure that we make this a part of our ministry somehow, either through these types of talks or workshops or other things. How does the church encourage the people who have the expertise in their churches to step into volunteering their time to launch that ministry? Because a lot of times, especially with the churches that I'm connected with, I happen to pastor, are smaller churches. And so the pastor can't do everything. Sometimes I have my own mental issues, so I can't help other folks with their mental issues. We all need some help up in here. So how do we get those people who are in the church, that are in the field, that can volunteer their time, not always paid time, to launch that type of ministry? Jasmine.
I think that it has to be something that's near and dear to the person's heart, because it is a lot of work. It's necessary work, but it just has to be someone that is committed to, helping the church heal. And whether that be having maybe like little packets of resources. If you need this, call this number. If you need this, you know. Even starting that way would be helpful because at least you have some sort of resources to provide people, and then building upon that, maybe starting with like a group, as someone suggested, where, you know, you focus on whatever the concern is.